Hi guys, I'm back for chapter 12 and it seems like my recording is not going very well, but we'll see how it ends up being. Okay, my roommate is online too, so that may be it. I'm going to share my screen and get that chapter 12 lecture on the board. All right, chapter 12. Okay. So for chapter 12, we're going to be doing quasi-experimental designs. Let me get that slideshow. As you probably know, quasi means sort of or not really experimental. And so these are the sort of experimental, not really experimental designs. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through this. We've got a bunch of objectives. I'm going to start with 1 and 2 here. Objective number 1, explain how quasi-experiments are used for program evaluation, and then we'll contrast some words you've probably heard of before, summative and formative evaluations. So let's take a look at that. First off, what is program evaluation? Well, it's just what it says it is. It's evaluating a program to see whether the program is effective or not. So say you have a program for tutoring students. You want to see if it's effective, and this is what you do, a program evaluation. So what you do in a program evaluation is kind of like an experimental design, but it's quasi-experiment because you don't have any random assignment to groups. That's the big difference, no random assignment. So what we see is, for example, something like a drug treatment clinic. You want to see if a drug treatment clinic is effective. And so you can do either a formative evaluation or a summative evaluation. The formative evaluation is during the program itself. And so, you might do surveys throughout the program, say, are you going to stay? Are you going to leave? How are you progressing through the program or something like that? And the idea there is to see how the program can be improved. The summative evaluation is just, you get that sum addition, the word summary is similar in that it's something after the program. So you look at how it worked afterwards to see whether you should continue on with that program. Okay, so what's the ideal experimental design to see if this program works? If you've got a drug program, for example, here's the problem. If we take a bunch of drug addicts and we say, okay, let's divide them into 2 groups. We've got a drug treatment group and a control group. The problem with that, of course, is that we are forcing people to be in a drug treatment group on this hand and then depriving people of a drug treatment group on the other hand. And so the random assignment ends up being somewhat of an ethical dilemma, because you don't want to deprive people of treatment and you don't want to force people into treatment as well. Okay, so that was objective 1. Objective 2 is to discuss the types of quasi-experimental designs out there. So we'll take a look at some of those. The single group design is, if you'll pardon my French, the shittiest design out there. All you do is you give people, let's say the drug treatment program, and then you measure how many of them are off of drugs. And then you say, oh, well, 60% of them recovered from drugs. That is crap. That's crap, okay? Let's say, for example, you want to know the effectiveness of an LU education. So you administer the program, which is 4 years in LU education, and then you get an exit exams to see how much people learned. It's really crappy because you don't even know how much they knew in the first place. You don't know how LU education compares to any other education. You don't know what it would have been like if they didn't have an LU education. So obviously, if you wanted to do an experiment on that, you would have to randomly assign participants. And, again, it's not possible in a lot of these situations. Okay, here's a better design. Here's something you can do to make that design better. Is to still use a single group, but now do a pre-test, post-test, or what's often called a before and after design. And that, it's just the same thing we've been talking about before with pre-test and post-test, except there's no random assignment. There's only one group. You measure dependent variables. So, for example, you give the exit exam just when students are entering as freshmen. You give them the same exam when they leave. So they enter as freshmen, take the exam, then they got 4 years of LU education, and then they take the exam before they leave. So at this point, we can consider whether they were, got better from the start, whether they improved from the start. So it's still different from an experimental design, because even if you did a repeated measures design, you would control for order effects if it was an experimental design, and obviously there are no order effects here. There's a lot of problems with this design. And for example, let's say we find out that they do better on the exit exam after 4 years. It could have been because they just matured and it's not really an LU education that produces the better scores, but it might be something else, for example, like working or something like that. And we'll go over those problems a little bit later as well. An even better design is this, the non-equivalent control group design. So non-equivalent just means unequal, right? But now you have a control group, so you can see the difference here. There's still no random assignment, right? And so, but you have an experimental group or quasi-experimental group and a control group, and then you can measure the dependent variable. So let's take an example. Let's look at the, I was noticing if you go to restaurants, sometimes kids are totally out of control, and sometimes their parents are sitting there on their cell phones and not, minding what these kids are doing. So at any rate, the child behavior of parents who use cell phones versus those who do not, let's say at a fast food restaurant. So you've got group 1 is the parents who use cell phones. Group 2 are the parents who do not. There's voluntary placement into groups in the sense that you're not telling them what group to go into. There's no random assignment. It's just that some parents are on cell phones and some parents are not, and then you measure their child's behavior. Now, there are still problems, because it may be that, parents who are on cell phones have, financial problems or whatever, you know what I'm saying? So there's all kinds of differences between the parents who are on cell phones, parents who are not on cell phones, and whatnot. So that is going to be different from the experimental design, in which we have randomly assigned. But at any rate, it's better than the previous quasi-experimental designs I've been talking about. Okay, one more design. Non-equivalent control group pretest, post-test design. So you can see all we've done here is added a pretest. We still have no random assignment, and that is what's different from experimental design. But this is the better design. So if we looked at kids' behavior prior to the parents using the cell phones, so that would be the first measure of the dependent variable or the pretest, and then we had them use the cell phones or don't use the cell phones, and then we looked at the behavior again, that would be even better, because we could see in the first measurement of the dependent variable, do we have equal there? Are the kids equally well behaved in the two groups? And then we have a better idea of being able to assume that, in fact, it was the cell phone, if in the second measure they get worse. Okay, so let's say we wanted to test whether summer orientation improves emotional adjustment in freshman college students. We could compare students who choose to go to summer orientation with those who don't, and we would test their emotional development before the summer orientation, and then test it again afterwards, and there'll be a control group that doesn't get any summer orientation. And so from there we could come to some conclusion, a little bit shaky on the internal validity, but still some conclusion that maybe summer orientation helped. And this is probably the best we can do with this, because randomly assigning people to go to summer orientation or not just is, has questionable ethics. Okay, I'm going to go on to objective 3 in the next video. So stay with me.